Good morning. Thank you for coming along. As it says, Simon's going to talk about cars and watches. I'm sure you know that the worlds collide and have collided for a long time, creating some really interesting collaborations. Simon's well kitted up for doing the talk. He's wearing his Chopin Millimilia drivers and navigator's tie, which is very smart. I'm sure he'll show you later if you want. So without further ado, I'm sure you all know Simon, needs no introduction. Cars and watches.
Cars and watches. Pick it up, man. Right, can you all hear? Nice to see a few familiar faces and a few known troublemakers, so I'm going to tell you now, any heckling, it's going to be quite severe, the way you're dealt with. You just be careful. Anyway, we haven't got much time, and Paul Maudsley from Bonhams is going to give you a few interesting facts as well shortly. So we better get going immediately. So this is probably one of the first car watches, and it was made by a guy called George Sharon in 1918, so that's about 9 years after Bugatti was founded. And he realized that the people that could buy cars were the rich people. And so he realized that they also wanted to be able to sort of show that they had these nice cars when they weren't necessarily driving them. And they wanted to kind of appear to belong to the same sort of club. So he created these watches which are shaped like the radiator surround of Bugatti. And he did other ones as well for Hispano Suiza and other makes. But these watches are now very collectible, and probably 10 or 15 years ago you could pick them up at car auctions. Certainly I know some Bonhams auctions for probably £3,000, £4,000 or £5,000, but this one was sold in Paris earlier this year and it made nearly €40,000, so the values have really risen. So that was one of the first car watches. And then as cars became more popular, the brands or the companies started to make watches specially for drivers, and some of them were shaped so that they could read the time by looking at the watch when it was on the wrist, and that meant making the shapes of the cases suitable to wear on the wrist sideways. And people like Patek Philippe and Cartier and a company called Craftsman made these kind of unusual side-mounted watches. But one of the nicest is this one, which was made by Vacheron Constantin in 1921, and they just turned the dial of the watch quarter of a turn in the case, and they moved the winding crown to the corner, and then you could wear the watch under your wrist while you were driving, because in those days the roads were pretty terrible, the steering on the cars was very vague and heavy, so you could drive your car quickly, and you could just look at your watch without taking your hand off the steering wheel. So that's the Vacheron 1921 watch, which was reproduced about 4 years ago, and I think it's been a pretty successful seller. Now this watch is very interesting. Patek Philippe, as most of you probably know, have never really followed trends, and they've never really made big watches. But they probably have made 3 or 4 really big watches. One of the best known is this one. And it was made for a very famous racing driver of the 20s and 30s, called Felice Trossi. And he was he ran Scuderia Ferrari. And he asked Patek to make him a special driving watch, which they did. Sometime between 1925 and 1932, this watch was made. And the interesting thing about Trossi is the way he used to wear it. He used to wear it over his shirt, and everyone thinks Gianni Agnelli, who was the head of Fiat, was the first guy to wear a watch over the top of his shirt cuff. But Trossi was doing it, 40 odd years before, or maybe 20 years before. Anyway, this watch came up for sale a few years ago. I think it was in 2008, I think. Anyway, it's got a 46mm case, so it's one of probably the biggest chronograph watch that Patek have ever made, wristwatch. And it was sold for £2.2 million, which is pretty amazing. And it was thought that Ralph Lauren had bought it because he owns one of Trossey's Mercedes cars. But that's actually not the case. It was bought by another private collector. So that probably is the most expensive car watch ever sold, by a long way. But this watch is interesting as well. This is the only split-seconds chronograph that Rolex made, and dates from 1942. And the interesting thing about this in relation to cars is that only maybe 5 or 6 of these watches have been seen. I think 12 are made altogether, and maybe actually 8 have turned up since the 40s. But the interesting thing about the 8 that have turned up is that they're all connected to the Targa Florio, which was the greatest road race of its era back in the 40s. And it's believed that these watches were given or used by competitors in that event because they've all turned up through people that have been associated with that race. And this is actually the most expensive Rolex watch ever sold. But it just shows you the disparity between Rolex and Patek, how far ahead Patek is in terms of collectability, and that this watch only made, only just over $1 million. The Sterling Moss, all dirty, been racing, another victory, no doubt. The interesting thing about his watch is not the watch, but the bracelet. If you have a look at that bracelet, he's obviously covered in oil and grime because he was in an open cockpit, single-seater car, and getting pretty dirty. And he got fed up with his watch straps becoming soaked in oil and being ruined. And so he designed his own strap, which he could wipe clean. Very clever. It's only sort of 2 bars of metal and a clasp, but it enabled him to drive, get the watch dirty, and just clean it up afterwards. And he still wears that today on his Chopard watch. He still wears one of those straps. Now, everyone knows about the sort of well-known driving watches like the Cosmograph Daytona and a lot of the Hoya watches. But probably the first watch to be made just for drivers, or with drivers in mind, was the Omega Speedmaster, which everyone associates with being the first watch worn on the moon and the only watch worn on the moon. But when it was first brought out, it was really intended for drivers, and they actually had an advertisement, and I'll read out the text, which says, our picture shows 2 sports car enthusiasts racing the clock, and the clock being no clock at all, but the new Omega high-precision wrist computer. And when the co-driver stops a large second hand at the end of the test mile, he reads off at a glance the time as well as the speed, the latter on the tacho productometer, etched into the rim of the case, which you can see around the edge there. It's now known as a tachymeter bezel. And the Michael Schumacher was an Omega ambassador in his heyday, and those watches, with the red and yellow dials that were the Schumacher special ones, are now becoming a little bit more collectible. So if you look out for those, it might be worth an investment. But as I said just now, one of the more famous driver's watches is the Hoya Carrera, which was created by this man, Jack Hoya, who has sort of followed a tradition in his family for making car-related timepieces. They made probably the first dashboard clock for a car, way back in the 30s. And Jack Hoya was at a motor race in his capacity as the person who supplied timing equipment to Ferrari. And he got talking to the parents, actually, of 2 Mexican guys who were the Rodriguez brothers, Ricardo and Pedro, who were racing for Ferrari. And their mother said, you know, I'm so glad that they're just doing this Formula One stuff because it's so much safer than taking part in the race they really wanted to do, which was the Carrera Panamericana, which is known to have been one of the most dangerous races of all time. And it started in the 1950s it was organised by the Mexican government to celebrate the opening of the Pan American Highway, the Mexican section of the Pan American Highway. And the people that took part at first were basically sort of cab drivers, and they were driving sort of four-door sedan cars at the beginning. But it became so well known so quickly that big-name drivers started to take part in it. And it was 2,100 miles, and it became legendary for the danger. And there was a famous event when a driver called Carl Kling, a Mercedes driver, travelling at about 140 miles an hour, and a vulture came through the windscreen of the car and hit him in the face, but he survived. Anyway, what Jack Heuer did, having met the Rodriguez brothers' parents, he loved this name, this Carrera name, and he thought it would make a great watch. And Heuer had a history already of naming watches, giving them names that were kind of evocative in somehow. So he decided to make this Carrera driver's watch, and it's now probably one of the best-known driver's watches of all, and it's 50 years old this year. And when it came out, it was $98, I think, roughly. And he managed to get his watches onto the wrists of some pretty famous drivers, including Bruce McLaren and particularly Joe Siffert and later Ayrton Senna. And I'd just like to pass you on to Paul Mosley of Bonhams now, because Bonhams has had a lot of success selling particularly Heuer watches, notably the collection of Arno Haslinger, who's sitting in the front here, who is the main, probably main authority on Heuer driving watches, and built up this incredible collection, which is most amazing because it was mainly new watches that were old stock that he had sought out from around the world. And this collection was sold, I think, was it 4 years ago?
2010.
3 years ago. And it really kind of brought to the fore the significance of these Heuer driver's watches, and now the collectability of them has really risen. But Paul will tell you a bit more about that.
Thank you, Sam. In particular, in 2010, my good friend Arno, 2009 actually, we decided we'd sell Arno's collection, which he'd been forming over 12 years, wasn't it? I think I sold him his first watch 12 years ago. So the link with motorsport there was something very important to Arno. He's a Porsche 911, well, call him an expert as well, really. So the tie-ins with obviously Tag Heuer that we did was something that proved that motorsport watches, in particular going through auction, you can create a whole market and an ambience around the watches. As a stat, we sold 90% of the watches were to actual car collectors rather than watch collectors, purely because they wanted a part of history, and Arno's watches were exceptional. You will see, how many downstairs, Arno?
There are 9.
There's 9 very rare Heuers from Arno's that he didn't sell in his collection, which are downstairs on the Tag Heuer stand. All rare Carreras, obviously celebrating the anniversary, 50th anniversary. So yeah, I mean, it's fantastic, really. Going back to the Mido Bugatti watch, that was a wonderful watch which I sold back in 2002 for the very first time in Monaco. And that, at the time, made a record price of $35,000. We then sold it again, the same watch in 2008 for $45,000. So that, is really the, the rarity that you get in that watch. Obviously, it's not the same level as Patek and the Rolex split seconds, which I'm fortunate to both see those examples. But yeah, there's a wonderful tie-in. At auction, we've sold Alberto Ascari's watch, Ron Flockhart's watch, and we sold Ayrton Senna's watch, which he wore in the 93. And we got $47,000 for that one, so fantastic. But provenance is the key. A lot of people come to us with engraved watches on the back saying, this is a racing driver's watch, but it's being able to prove the lineage from the driver right through. But yeah, once you do that, then you can create a very strong price. Okay.
Great. Have you got any questions, Paul, afterwards? If you have any nice watches you want to sell, I'm sure he'll. He's very willing to sign you up.
Any valuations?
Yeah. So there's the Carrera, the Actually, that might be the... I was going to say that's the original Carrera, but I think it's actually the reproduction from the... What do you think? Anyway, that's what it looked like, roughly. So the other car watch... Oh, there's some more. This is the Silverstone. Again, I was mentioning earlier how Jack Hoyer was very good at naming watches and sort of giving them a bit of a... making them evocative. So we've got this one on the left, which is the Silverstone, which was quite an interesting watch of the 70s, not made for very long, maybe about 2 or 3 years, I think, 72 to 74 or something. And this one in the middle is the Carrera 50th anniversary Jack Hoyer tribute watch, which is a really interesting design because it's got the winding crown at the top, just like and the push pieces, like a traditional stopwatch, and that's proved a popular seller and probably will be quite collectible one day. And this other Carrera is the kind of the latest of the standard Carreras, and it's the one that celebrates the 50th anniversary of McLaren, which also happens to be this year. And there's the Monaco, the square case Monaco, which was famous for being used by Steve McQueen in the movie Le Mans. Possibly one of the most boring films of all time, but... And there's another McLaren watch that was made for the MP412C, which is the latest McLaren supercar before the P1, which is going to come out next year. Now then, the other watch is celebrating its 50th anniversary, the other driver's watch, is the Cosmograph Daytona, which has had phenomenal success. And this is the Daytona Speedway at the bottom. And Rolex were involved with the Daytona Speedway ever since it opened in the late 1950s, 1959. And they introduced the Cosmograph watch in '63. But it became so connected with Daytona and motor racing that after a couple of years, the American market asked if we could have the Rolex Cosmograph Daytona, which is what it became and what it's known as now. Because that name stuck and it came to be known as that throughout the world. And winners of the Daytona 500-mile race are now given Rolex Cosmograph Daytona as part of the prize. And Rolex has obviously had a lot of famous motor racing ambassadors, including Tom Christensen, who is the most successful Le Mans racer of all time. He's won Le Mans, I think he's won it 9 times now, 8 or 9 times. That was Richard Gauntlet, who's the son of the former Aston Martin chairman, by coincidence. Everyone associates the Cosmograph Daytona with is Paul Newman. And the reason for that is he made a motor racing film in 1969 called Winning. And it's quite often thought that the watch is associated with Paul Newman because he wore it in the film, which he didn't actually. But what did happen is that he became totally hooked on motor racing as a result of preparing for the film. And a couple of years later he started racing and he went on to set up a pretty successful race team called Newman Haas Racing. Anyway, in the film with him was his wife, Joanne Woodward. And when he started racing for himself, she gave him this Cosmograph Daytona watch, which he kept and apparently wore regularly for his entire life. And his team did actually win the Daytona 500 once, so he was actually presented with a watch from that as well. But I don't know what Paul thinks, but I think Paul Newman's Cosmograph Daytona is probably definitely a 7-figure watch if it ever came for sale. But it probably won't, but it might be soon. It's going to be in his December sale, obviously. Sorry?
I was fortunate to try it on.
Really? Well, that's a story. Amazing. How did that happen?
Can't really say here.
Okay. But this watch has become incredibly collectible in what is now known as the Paul Newman version. This isn't the Paul Newman version, but this is, and you can. Although this is a very recent Cosmograph, it's quite obvious that there's a slight difference in the dial, the way the dial is designed. The one he's wearing has basically got a much more open and clearer dial. There's one downstairs for you to have a look at. It's quite interesting to see how different it is, although it's obviously the same model of watch. But what Joanne Woodward did when she went to buy him a watch, she happened to buy one with what is known as an exotic dial. And it was an option that you could specify. And nobody was really particularly interested in it, didn't really like it that much. And it was only available for a couple of years, and I think the reference was 6241. Is that right? Anyway, watches with this exotic dial are now known as Paul Newman's, and they've become incredibly valuable. Selling normally for about sort of between 50, 60, 70,000 pounds for a nice one. But this one was sold a few months ago, and it's got this sort of yellowy lemon-coloured dial, which the auction house that sold it said it was probably a prototype. I don't know how right that is, but in any event, it made $850,000, that watch, so quite amazing. But going back to that other one, that watch at the top there is the only platinum Cosmograph Daytona model that's been made, and Rolex introduced it this year to mark the 50th anniversary. And like all platinum Rolex watches, it has this ice blue dial, which they don't use in any other watch made from any other material than platinum. Breitling for Bentley. In the 70s and 80s, there were quite a few, when I suppose luxury goods weren't quite as popular as they are now. There were lots of licensing agreements, and brands gave their names to other brands to use and in different ways. And Rolls-Royce, for example, allowed Corum to make some very unusual watches which were shaped like the radiator surround of a Rolls-Royce. Very 70s look. And Porsche got together with IWC. IWC used to make these Porsche watches, and now they make them themselves under Porsche Design, which is an offshoot of the Porsche company. And Cartier actually made Ferrari watches back then. There's quite a nice story about Enzo Ferrari and the Pope, a papal visit to the Ferrari factory in 1988, when Enzo Ferrari was pretty much on his deathbed. He was very ill, but he made sure to get Cartier to make a couple of Ferrari watches engraved on the back, one of which he wanted to give to Pope John Paul. It's a bit sad because he genuinely was too ill to get out of bed, and these watches remained on his bedside table because he was so convinced he was going to be able to get up and present the watch to him. But that never happened, and eventually it was just given to the Pope by someone else at Ferrari. But it's quite a sort of poignant story, that. But it was Breitling, which got together with Bentley in 2002, that really kind of kick-started the modern trend, I suppose, for car-related watches. And once they had done that, actually, I'll just tell you about the typical details. So the sort of knurled bezel, which is kind of reminiscent of the sort of engine turning on a Bentley car, the switchgear and so on. And they've made the winding weight in the shape of a wheel, Bentley wheel. The back there is quite good. And there have been many different models of Breitling for Bentley watches now. It's been going on for 10 years, just over 10 years. There are a few. And then Jaeger then got together with Aston Martin in 2004. And that was quite an interesting historical connection because back in the 30s, Aston Martin was backed by a very wealthy, sort of aristocratic playboy racer. And he insisted that Jaeger instruments were used in Aston Martin racing cars. So there's a long history of car-related things. And Jaeger went on to make car instruments, and there still is a Jaeger company making them today. But anyway, the Amvox watches are very interesting and very technically advanced. And this one is I think this is called the Dbs Transponder Watch. And it was very Bond-like, because obviously Bond is a big name with Aston Martin. And this watch was designed to be able to open your Aston DBS from 20 or 30 paces by just pressing the sapphire crystal. Quite clever. And then going back to the Bugatti watches I mentioned at the beginning and that Paul was talking about, this is the 21st century Bugatti watch. and it's made by a company called Parmigiani Florio. And when the Bugatti Veyron, which is still the world's fastest production car, was due to be launched in 2004, Parmigiani collaborated with Bugatti to make this incredible, it was called the Type 370 watch. And very radical. It goes back to the days when driver's watches could be looked at from the side. So it's got a lateral movement. Instead of looking down on the watch, the dial is on the side of your wrist. And the incredible, it's got 6 sapphire crystals, so you can see the movement from all sorts of different angles. And the case is made from 8 different components. And it has an electric winder, because it's got such a long power reserve, a 10-day power reserve, electric winder to wind it up. But unfortunately the watch, although it's incredibly complex, the watch was finished before the car was perfected, because they had a lot of problems with the Veyron, mainly with the tyres catching fire, because the car was so rapid. Parmigiani bought the watch out and started selling it, and it's been through various versions now. And this is the latest one, in rose gold, and that's a £250,000 watch, being made in 30 examples. But the Veyron car is now over 1.2 million euros, so I suppose relatively cheap compared with the car. This is a watch from Richard Mille, who's a huge car enthusiast, and he's the sponsor of the classic Le Mans race, and a big car collector. He's got some incredible cars, including the V16 BRM Formula 1 car, which is very rare. And he is very interested in using high-tech materials, the sort of things that you get in the racing car world, the sort of materials that are used to make Formula 1 cars. And he's unusual in that he makes watches with complications that you wouldn't normally associate with a sports watch. You know, he'll make a tourbillon, but very rugged watch that can withstand high impact. And the tennis player Rafael Nadal wears a tourbillon when he's playing tennis, and it keeps working. Bubba Watson, the golfer, wears a Richard Mille watch. But Felipe Massa is also a Richard Mille ambassador, and you may know that he had a huge crash in 2009 when he was at the Hungaroring, practicing for the Hungarian GP, hit the Armco at 170 miles an hour with his watch on. He was hurt, but he was fine. But amazingly, the watch, we're told, carried on working, and he carried on wearing it. So that's testament to Richard Mille's ability to make these very robust watches, which are also, depends on your taste, but I mean, they are quite beautiful to look at. And it's interesting, the screws that hold the case together, titanium screws, a thimble full of those screws is worth 200,000 Swiss francs. They're all, titanium. It's Max Busser, who's another avant-garde watchmaker, to say the least. And last year he brought out this great-looking watch, which is called the HM05, on the road again. And the interesting thing about this watch, I don't know if anybody in here is a Lamborghini Miura fan, but if you look at the watch he's wearing, it's got these sort of louvres on the top of it. And they're designed along the lines of the Miura rear window louvre. But the clever thing about it is that they open these louvres to let light in, and that recharges the luminosity on the numbers. That was made in '66, an edition of '66 made from zirconium, a zirconium case. It's been pretty popular, so he's just making a red gold version now, which is going to come out at the beginning of next year. Two more unusual watches. Probably heard of the Laferrari Ferrari car, which is the hybrid supercar. They're going to be making about 470 of them, I think. And it's going to be a million euro sports car that you can only buy if you're invited by Luca de Montezemolo. Anyway, Hublot is the partner, the watch partner of Ferrari. And they've created this Laferrari watch, which is actually even rarer than the car, because they're only going to make 50 of them. Pretty amazing watch. The movement has got 637 parts in it. and it's got a 45-day power reserve, which is quite phenomenal. They've managed to incorporate sufficient winding barrels into the case to keep the watch running on its own for 45 days. I think that might actually be a record. I think there's another watch that will run on its own for that long. And that watch is about 225,000. And Hublot also works with the Ayrton Senna Foundation and creates watches now and then. It's done sort of 5 different models. And some of the proceeds from the sale of the watches go to the Senna Foundation, which is run by Ayrton Senna's sister. And it provides education for needy children, basically, in Brazil. And this is the latest Senna watch. And you'll see it's got some sort of car imagery. The winding, the barrel for the mainspring up there, it looks like a brake disc, which is quite clever. And the strap is designed to look like the sort of upholstery of a sports car seat. That's quite nice. And again, IWC this year went into full partnership with Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team. And they're again using a lot of high-tech materials that are used in the production of Formula One cars. They're using titanium and lots of carbon fiber and so on. And they've made a tourbillon, a constant force tourbillon watch. But the more interesting one is the one on your left, which is this, it's a perpetual calendar flyback chronograph. And if the watch is kept wound sufficiently, it should, that calendar won't need adjusting until the year 2100, which is pretty amazing, really. But I don't suppose we'll be around to see it. Another popular thing nowadays with cars and watches is to put bits of famous cars into the watches. And you'll recognise this guy as Nick Mason, who's the famous drummer from Pink Floyd, and a huge car collector. And in the 1980s, he bought that car he's sitting in there, which is a Ferrari 250 GTO, which has become one of the most, well, probably the most collectible classic car of the moment. And they made 39 GTOs, and he paid £35,000 for his one. And one was sold last year for $38 million, so it's quite a good investment. But he uses his car all the time, and you regularly see it at Goodwood and taking part in classic races. And obviously it does get damaged. So he got together with this company called Scalfaro, which is a tiny German watch brand. And there are parts in this Scalfaro watch, which is called the Bizzarini edition, which is dedicated to Giotto Bizzarini, who designed the GTO shape, which is regarded as one of the most beautiful classic car shapes of all. So there are a few bits in this watch which came from Nick Mason's car during repair, and it's got the other little touches. It's got the firing order of the engine engraved on the case and Bizzarini's signature on the back. So that's one watch that contains bits of car. And also, if you go down to the Armin Strom stand downstairs, they are the timing partner of Marussia Formula One. And the watches they're making now actually use parts of the old engine blocks from the Marussia cars incorporated into the watches. So, but there's been a little bit of interest as well in, there's some more Scalfaro watches. And this one at the bottom is the Zagato Db4 watch, which is made with a very famous Aston Db4 Gt Zagato from 1960. And again, that's got a few components from the car in it. And it's signed by Ercole Spada, who designed a lot of cars for Zagato. And this is Chopard's Mille Miglia watch. And the guy who runs Chopard is a guy called Carl Friedrich Schauffele, and he's an absolute car nut, has been for years. He's got a fantastic collection of probably more than 40 pretty rare cars, including Gullwing Mercedes and Mille Miglia Ferrari. And he's probably got the best job in the world if you like cars and watches, because he's able to create these car-related watches. And the latest collaboration is with Zagato, this watch on the left. They've designed various parts of the appearance, including the strap, because one of the features of a lot of Zagato cars is they have what's called a double bubble roof, which is a roof with two lumps in it. And they've kind of tried to replicate this on the strap, which is raised up. And it's available in two versions. And there he is in his Mille Miglia Ferrari, and that's Jackie X, who's co-driven for him in the Mille Miglia quite a lot. They're great friends. And this is another watch that's related to a car event, and it's made by Oris, and they sponsor every year the Swiss Paris Raid, which is a drive from Basel to Paris for classic cars. It's not a race, it's a timed reliability trial. And that's me doing it in my TR6, and I've met this lovely schoolboy on the way, on the route, who's standing at the back. He's called James Gurney. He's the editor of QP magazine. He's just sitting in the passenger seat with his cap on. There he is, little chap, yeah. He's only about 9 then. Anyway, I drove the car all the way to Basel and all the way back to my home in Devon, but James, he just jumped on the aeroplane and left again as soon as possible and left me to drive. So it was only 2,500 miles, it was fine. And there has been a bit of interest in motorcycle watches as well, but they haven't really taken off quite in the same way as car watches, because I suppose it's the market. There aren't that many super rich people who are that into bikes as there are into classic cars, but there have been a few, and this was made by Jaeger with Valentino Rossi. And if you're into motorbikes, you'll recognise his famous race number there, 46. And so they made that in a limited edition for a while. But the most interesting one probably is the Graham Chronofighter TT watch. And Graham sponsors the fantastic Isle of Man TT race. It's been going on now for over 100 years. And the winners of the senior TT are given one of the Chronofighter watches. And I'm not sure if we've got a picture of... No, we haven't. There's a UK rider called John McGuinness who has had the most unbelievable success. He's won something like 40 TT races, and he's won the senior TT, I think, 7 or 8 times now. So he's got quite an impressive collection of these Chronofighter watches. And I don't know if anyone who hasn't been to the Isle of Man, even if you're not into motorbikes, to see the TT is really worth a trip over there, because until you've seen a motorbike going up Bray Hill at 190 miles an hour with a petrol station on one side and traffic lights and people sitting in their gardens watching it, it really is quite phenomenal. So definitely recommend it. And this watch here has got various sort of pointers to the TT on it, including that little yellow indicator just before 3. There's a little yellow mark. It's just before the 17-minute time, and the course is 37.73 miles, and that's how long it takes John McGuinness to ride around the entire course on public roads on a motorcycle. He did 17 minutes, so it's pretty amazing. And his lap record is 131.5 miles an hour average on the road, so quite a phenomenal man. Now this is the old GM design building. It's a very interesting story, this. It's in Detroit, which I think you all know has become the first city in America to go bankrupt. And as a result, a lot of the car companies have closed down, and it used to be called Motor City, but now there are very few. There are some big manufacturers there, but it's not like it used to be. And people are looking for jobs, and a company called Shinola, which was famous as a shoe shine, a shoe polish brand. Yeah, so the guy who founded Fossil Watches, which is a very sort of affordable brand making millions of watches a year, and he sold it subsequently, he's got together with Rondo, which is a well-known Swiss movement maker and watchmaker. And they bought the name Shinola, and they set up a nice watch brand. And the people who are making the watches in this building, in this old Argonaut building, which is where the GM research laboratory used to be, a lot of them are former car workers, who lost their jobs, and now they're back into sort of making mechanical things by making these watches. quite nice. They're not very expensive, about £400, that one. That's called the, I can't remember what it's called actually, but that is one of the sort of first models. But the future of the car watch is here, I'm afraid. And this has just come out, or just been announced at the Frankfurt Motor Show by Nissan. And their performance car building section is called Nismo. And they've made this watch called the Nissan Nismo watch, which has been actually made in Switzerland, collaborating with Swiss watchmakers. And it is a smartwatch, but it's totally connected to the car. So if you're taking your car on a track day or something, it'll do all your lap times for you. And it will measure your heart rate, your breathing. Obviously, it's a lot different from George Sharon's Bugatti watch, but that is what the youngsters of today might want, I don't know. But I think there'll always be a market for... Sorry? You have to be in a Nissan. Well, it is configured to the ECU of the car, so it probably does only work in a certain Nissan, I guess. But the amazing thing is, it's £200. You know, it costs about £200, and it does all these incredible things. So it'll even tell you the average speed of the car and the fuel consumption. So that's it, really. It's 100 years or so of car watches. Thanks for coming.